Hello, my name is Yacine Jernite, and along with my co-chair, Dr. Margaret Mitchell, we're going to talk to you about some of the work that we've done recently in the BigScience Data Governance Working Group. We're also co-chairing this group with Hugh and Graham. So, data governance has recently become the focus of an increasing amount of attention and scholarship, but it can sometimes be hard to pin down what exactly is meant by the phrase, especially since there are dozens of different definitions in different contexts, with sometimes subtle and sometimes not so subtle differences. What they do tend to agree on, however, is that governance is a collaborative process which involves a combination of mechanisms and multiple stakeholders to help define the way things are done in a particular domain. This process can include shaping norms and values around best practices in a field, adapting laws and regulations to changing needs, or devising both organizational and technical tools to support and inform these evolutions. As a project that needs to deal with large amounts of text data to support a well-defined scientific endeavor, BigScience provides a unique opportunity to dive further into what these processes can look like for contemporary human data governance. In this talk, we present our efforts so far to build up a data stewardship organization as a practical application and as an experiment in engaging with all of these aspects of data governance, and which we hope will provide a useful basis for future work in this space. So what does this organization look like? The first step to devising a global data management structure is identifying specific roles in data governance. Here from right to left, we have the data rights holders that can have either commercial ownership or personal rights over the data. We have the data custodians that typically manage and create the text, and the data steward that oversees the general flow of data and its uses. Then we have the data modelers, that's us as NLP researchers, who conduct statistical analysis and train models on the aggregated text data. And another category we will call data helpers that includes lawyers, advocates, and anyone else who can help provide tools and context to help with data governance. We'll describe these roles and their interactions in more details in the rest of the presentation. Here's our timeline to put this organization back in context of the overall BigScience project. We are working to have the data stewardship organization and data hosts ready to serve data in time to start training the large model by the end of the year 2021. And we'll then be further working to consolidate the structure and the agreements that we've put in place to make the data more broadly available for visualization and exploration by the end of the workshop. If you're interested in how the project has evolved, you can also check out our poster and recording from episode 1 of BigScience online. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, one of the main axes of data governance is the identification and the elaboration of the norms and values that support decisions at all levels. In order to provide grounding for the rest of our work, we thus started by identifying common values that we as BigScience participants commonly associate with responsible data use. We then looked to existing declarations of human, civic, cultural, and economic rights from several institutions to support our reflection and arrived at the following list of values to prioritize in our design choices. Those are first respecting licensing and attribution and giving people legal controls over their data and the products of their work. The concept of just rewards, where we want to make sure that people and groups share in the benefits that come from using their data. We want to respect privacy, which is something that has been much talked about in the context, for example, of the GDPR, and the right of individuals to control who may have access to their personal identifying information. We want to promote inclusion and representation of individuals and of groups, both in cultural resources and also in the technology that is developed using data. We want to promote autonomy, which represents, for example, the requirement to obtain consent for using data or to honor contestation mechanisms. And lastly, we all agreed on the notion of beneficence, which is proactively considering prospective harms that come from what we do and aiming to minimize them in all decisions whenever possible.
So there are several roles in the governance structure, with data custodians being in charge of the creation, providing, and hosting the data. These roles aren't mutually exclusive, so data providers can also be data hosts. In this framework, data hosts store the data as it's collected and then serve the data for only small exploratory work, the final training run in BigScience will happen on a larger compute cluster. Ideally, we think we're going to use the Jernite supercomputer, which is a public compute infrastructure provided by the French government. In the meantime, we're focusing on collecting data from data rights holders, which may be individuals writing content on the web, as well as institutions that generate textual data, such as newspapers. This data collection may then be provided to data hosts directly, or else scraped by a data provider, such as Internet Archive. Finally, the data hosts collect this data as it comes in and are in charge of helping to curate the data in light of the laws and norms of their region. This is a kind of divide and conquer approach to data collection, where institutions that are the most relevant to different kinds of data can be involved in how that data is processed. And all of these parties may help with data curation and asserting constraints on usage. These entities collaborate via an umbrella organization, which we're calling the DSO, or else Umbrella Bird. We additionally include legal scholars and data rights advocates to help us navigate the intricacies of working with data. But the basic idea here is that it's a meeting place for all of the different parties to align on different sorts of protocols, access controls, input-output formats, all the various things that need to be done in order to have a more holistic sharing of data. Some of the basic principles we've already established with respect to the relationship between different parties include the relationship between data modelers and data hosts. So data modelers' use is limited for a certain amount of time. Data hosts and data providers. So for example, data providers will have access to the derived products. So for example, if a data provider gives some raw data to a data host, and that data host curates it in some way or runs some tools over it, then the data provider will also have access to those. And then the data host and the DSO, which provides things like technical support, and the DSO, operates as a kind of advisory role. We're breaking ground in a lot of areas. We found it a little bit difficult to figure out the specific laws that apply to what we're doing. The questions here outline some of the issues that take a wider view than just the technical questions, and where law hasn't clearly defined the courses of action. And we actually have a role to play in informing the creation of the relevant laws for data governance. So chance to come on board if you want to have influence there. Our most recent work since our last presentation has made progress along 3 different verticals, where legal scholars are now part of the governance and are helping us to reconcile our governance values with local laws, as well as logistics such as defining licenses. We've also begun getting down to very specific details with data hosts, working in particular with AI2 in the US and Umanum in France. AI2 has been a particularly valuable partner and has made significant headway in defining access controls and the flow of data. We will also soon have a data sourcing hackathon, where we're going to build a catalog of data sources and providers in a variety of languages. So if you're interested in participating, please let us know, please participate. The more people, the better, the more languages, the better. So if you're passionate about linguistic diversity, you should come and help. And even with all of this work, there's still going to be a lot of open questions. So the specifics of how to remove data items on request, that's a very open research area. There's lots of sort of minor solutions we have, but nothing that's a very well-formed process that could, be repeated in a lot of different processes. Restricting data use. So can we do anything other than having a license? Protecting private information. So, there are PII tools, but those often aren't enough. So these sort of questions about how to deal with these still really have to be defined. And, we might not answer them by the end of this workshop. Cool. All right. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan from the Interpretability and Visualization Working Group, here to talk about some of the work we've been doing over the past few months. So as a broad summary, we were originally created to be an umbrella group to spin off and coordinate interpretability and visualization projects. We grew to include about 102 members, and that's fluctuated over time, most recently around the Foundation Models Workshop. Finally, we have spurred a number of smaller projects and working groups, including a project that was focused on bias and fairness and interpretability towards that end, that eventually merged with the bias and fairness evaluation sub-working group. A project that was focused on assessing the creativity of outputs from language models. And finally, a sub-working group on emergent properties and training dynamics of large neural networks, which is the group that I run currently. So to give an overview of the training dynamics subgroup, broadly, we aim to understand what happens structurally to large language models over the course of training. Our focus in particular is on the emergent properties of those models and structures that might emerge internally in the network, either in, for example, the weights or in terms of modularity of substructures or linguistic representations. And finally, figuring out how to relate the structure and function of those large language models over training time. There have been a number of people involved over the course of the subgroup, and which began in June, and it's really fluctuated depending on availability and interest and the kinds of works that we've been pursuing at different points in time. So some of our areas of interest have been understanding modularity in large networks, when and if small subnetworks have been reused on completion of various kinds of tasks, the weight evolution and trajectories of these networks over training time, different kinds of testing methods we can use to evaluate different forms of emergent properties. So for example, in the context of linguistic representations, we might focus on probing approaches that attempt to identify how certain kinds of syntactic or linguistic representations are encoded in various layers of the neural network. In addition, we have been looking at exploring how work from statistics on efficient sampling strategies that test for network structure and graph structure can be applied to the neural network setting. In particular, there have been a couple of papers that are basically about efficient sampling strategies for smaller substructures within a large network. And we think that perhaps some of that work can be applied to make testing approaches more efficient. In addition, we want to look at the emergent acquisition of abilities over the course of training time and knowledge acquisition in particular. And we've been coordinating with a different working group towards that end to make sure that checkpointing strategies include the kinds of information we would want to use to determine, for example, when information is being memorized versus not. And then in terms of emergent structures, internal to the neural networks, we've been exploring as a starting point, for example, things like linguistic and syntactic representations, branch specialization, weight banding, the emergence of topological structures or predication structures in language models over time, and a number of other things that have been included over the course of our work on this topic. And then our final two things that we've been looking at have been approaches to understanding loss landscapes. and thinking a little bit about explainability and how to connect some of these structural facts that we might discover in a neural network to the performance that that network will have to generalize or to solve different kinds of tasks. So just to give a sense of some of the work we've been doing currently and are in the process of completing, the major push that we've had that we're kind of coming, I guess, towards the end of in terms of our existing papers has been somewhat of a literature search and developing a survey of existing research in the areas that we just described, and broadly trying to connect some of those approaches to more classical work on understanding emergence and self-organization in complex systems. And we've been doing really a broad survey of the literature in that regard to understand what the current state of the art is, especially insofar as it seems like with self-supervision, people have become more and more interested in the emergent properties of large models. We also coordinated with the engineering working group early on to outline the checkpointing strategy that they ought to use. And we've been working with them pretty consistently to develop strategies to deal with instabilities during training or to document different kinds of design decisions one might make. Finally, and more recently, we have started implementing some of our prior work, some of the prior existing work on probing, and we plan to start experimenting with model checkpoints soon. All of that is going to be on our GitHub page, which I've linked here, and we'll also mention in a couple of slides down. But that work is really just beginning. So I'll continue to expand the kinds of things that we want to implement there so that we have a pretty large suite of experiments we can run on the checkpointed models that we have. So looking ahead, the next push, as I mentioned, will be mainly about engineering and experimentation, both to get a sense of how the existing literature, when applied to the models we're developing over the course of BigScience, can be used to shed light on the internal structure of those models, but also in really trying to go beyond the existing literature. And that might be modernizing some of the approaches and making them more compatible with the models that we have now, which are developed using deep speed, but also really thinking about what are novel directions to explore as a research project. And one thing that I mentioned in the past, a couple slides back, was exploring how sampling work in statistics for structure identification can be used to make some of this work more efficient. But in addition, we might want to think about, for example, this idea of causal emergence and how it could apply to large language models. There was a recent paper that really tried to explore this problem and think about what the quote unquote causal capacity of a complex system is. And that's more of a concept, I think, in computational biology, as the authors mentioned, but we have been exploring, or we would like to explore down the line, how this might be applied to the complex systems that we see in neural networks. And in addition, an additional thing we've been trying to explore is emergent equivariance in large language models. Currently, that's only been explored in vision models where equivariance is more natural, for example, to translations or rotations. In the context of language models, it's less clear what kinds of things they might be equivariant to, if they are at all, but that could be something like permutation or linguistic structure or things of that nature. So that's something we'd like to explore in the future as well. And that list is just going to continue to expand. We're always looking for new ideas of things to explore in that regard. Finally, I just wanted to go over what the best way to get involved is. So the first thing you should do if you want to get involved and work a little bit more either on the broad interpretability and visualization problems or on the training dynamics group particularly, is answer the Google form that I've linked here and join the interpretability and visualization working group, and also our Slack. If you want to participate in the engineering side, you can claim an issue on the Training Dynamics GitHub repo, where we'll continue to add more issues going forward. And there's really not going to be any dearth of work to be done there. And then finally, we have weekly meetings every Friday from noon to 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Feel free to join our next weekly meeting. I always try to give an overview for new members and give maybe a more complete sense of the kinds of problems we're interested in working on and what you can do to participate and help our efforts there. So, and feel free to reach out if there are any questions going forward. I'm always available on the Slack. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carpuat. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Evaluation Working Group for BigScience, and I'm here today with Ellie Pavlick and Scialom to tell you about what we've been up to so far. So we started immediately at the start of the project on April 28th following the kickoff, and we were very happy to have a lot of members from the very beginning, growing to 160 members, with 8 co-chairs helping manage the activities. With so many people involved, we divided into subgroups to make sure we covered all the aspects of evaluations that were important to us. So we organized into 5 subgroups. 3 of them were based on the types of tasks, the type of evaluation tasks we were going to conduct, so extrinsic, intrinsic, and few-shot generalization. And 2 groups had more cross-cutting concerns, looking at bias and social impact, and making sure we took into account multilinguality in all aspects of evaluation. So from May to June, we worked in these small groups to do literature review, think about the research questions that were important to address, and establish criteria for the evaluation. After that, we tried to dig a little deeper in the literature and to see what were the existing data sets that could help address the questions. So we aggregated about 70 candidate data sets across all the subgroups that were considered to be part of the final evaluation benchmark. Because that's way too many data sets, we tried to narrow it down to a more manageable size, and we did that collaboratively. On July 19th, we had a sales pitch meeting where people could advocate for the data set of their choice and try to convince the rest of the group to select it for the final eval set. There was a vote by the full group, and here's what we ended up with. So all the aspects of evaluations that were considered by our subgroups are represented here. Our tasks are organized across extrinsic, intrinsic, few-shot, and biosocial impact dimensions. We have 7 extrinsic tasks, 8 intrinsic, 9 few-shot, and 4 that are specifically about bias and social impact aspects. Multilinguality doesn't have a specific category, of course, but it's represented throughout. We have tasks that represent all the languages that the model will be trained on, ranging from extrinsic tasks like machine translation or summarization, intrinsic tasks like named entity recognition, and few-shot tasks that will take the form, for instance, of question answering.
So we're currently given this list of tasks. We're currently in what we're calling our September sprint, which is really kicking off the main engineering effort for the evaluation working group. So our goal is to create a benchmark that we will use to evaluate the BigScience model, as well as use to do basic research on other models and comparisons between types of models and trade-offs between types of evaluations. So so this benchmark is covering the tasks that were just described, and it's meant to target these different areas of evaluation. So intrinsic, extrinsic, multilinguality, few-shot, et cetera. We currently have a basic API in place on our GitHub. And so this API consists of a zero-shot prompt-based interface to all of these different evaluations. And we're working on developing a fine-tuning interface, which we'll use for many of the evaluations as well, so we can compare how the model performs in both of those evaluation settings. If you are interested in getting involved and are not yet involved, or if you're already involved and want to know what's next, now is a very good time, because we are just ramping up on this kind of core engineering part of the project. So there's a ton of issues on our GitHub page that are open, kind of up for grabs. What the contributions look like right now is basically taking these tasks that we just described, that we've chosen based on our vote, and converting them into this format so that they're all in a standard format, and we can evaluate models with a single script or set of scripts. There's also some tasks, and will be more soon, on taking those the data sets we have, which exist only in English or only in a subset of languages, and converting the prompts, either translating the prompts or writing new prompts in all of the languages we want to evaluate. So at a minimum, this is all of the training languages that we're using in BigScience, but we are also open to and planning to include languages that we're not explicitly trained on for evaluation purposes. So if you are interested in multilinguality, or you speak a language, any of the big science languages, or honestly any language that you want to see included in the evaluation, this is a great way to get involved in that as well. So the main way to get involved is make sure you join our working group and get added to the Slack and the GitHub, and then you basically can just claim any of the open issues on GitHub and use Slack to coordinate with others who are working on that or related issues, and go for there. So right now we've already started working on this, but the plan is to really ramp it up and finalize the benchmark during a big science-wide hackathon, which has not been officially scheduled yet, but hopefully sometime this fall, or it will be sometime this fall, hopefully in the next month or so. So stay tuned for that. There would hopefully be a lot of kind of community effort and collaboration during a short period of time, where if you're interested in getting involved and kind of socializing and coordinating with all of the others who are working on related tasks, that would be the time to do it.
So now that Ellie has presented to you the current, right now effort to develop a minimum viable benchmark, which will allow to evaluate the BigScience model, what's going next? Actually, we want to get more in depth about basic research to develop evaluations that actually don't exist yet to evaluate these models. It means also to develop new tools, because as you may imagine, analyzing this model, the result of these models around all these different tasks without just doing a simple average is something really important, and developing these tools will have a large impact on the field. And so we plan to start something with a research event the 15th of October, which will lead to a collaborative research along aligned interest. So what is the idea of this event? We want this event that everyone can prepare a small speech to advocate for a research idea he thinks will be important for the field. And so everyone can present, and if you have interesting idea, you can present your ideas. If you are interested in some idea that has been presented, you can also join. So this is the goal of the event. The pitch will happen the October 15th, so feel free to join, either to present or just to attend and join later other projects. If you don't know how to do that, you can reach out to me, to one of the other chairs, or to join the evaluation working group. Thank you, and hope to see you soon.